The United Galactic Federation had spent millennia cultivating a delicate balance of interstellar diplomacy, scientific enlightenment, and non-violent conflict resolution. Entire bureaucracies were dedicated to ensuring that developing civilizations followed a logical, peaceful trajectory toward integration into the galactic community. Then there was Earth. From the moment humanity discovered fire, it was clear that their species had a unique approach to technology. Instead of carefully considering the long-term implications of their discoveries, they took the throw it at something and see what happens route. It had taken most civilizations tens of thousands of years to develop space travel. Humans, meanwhile, had strapped explosives to a tin can and hurled themselves at the moon while half the planet debated whether it was real. The Federation had made several attempts to contact Earth, each ending in escalating disaster. Their first emissary had been greeted with a cheerful, "What up, nerd?" before being invited to participate in a televised cooking contest. The second attempt involved a diplomatic delegation that ended with the Federation's finest minds fleeing in terror when humans introduced them to the concept of hot dogs, a food product that seemingly had no identifiable ingredients. By the time Earth started broadcasting cat videos and competitive slap-fighting tournaments into the cosmos, the Federation had made its decision: quarantine. They labeled Earth as a developmental outlier and unanimously agreed that it was best to leave them alone. Then came the Crux Dominion, a war-hungry empire known for assimilating lesser civilizations under their banner. The Crux believed in conquest above all else. They had fought and won battles against some of the most advanced species in the galaxy, carving out an empire built on brutal efficiency. When they learned about Earth, a seemingly defenseless, disorganized, primitive society with no proper planetary defense system, they saw an opportunity. Humanity would be a simple conquest, an easy victory to bolster their reputation. A mere formality. It was the single worst decision they ever made. The invasion began with all the textbook tactics. The Crux sent their standard pre-invasion broadcast, a grandiose declaration of their military superiority, boasting of their technological advancements and their glorious war history. Naturally, Earth didn't get the message, not because they were afraid, but because the Crux had chosen to transmit their demands on a frequency that most humans ignored: AM radio. The only ones who actually heard the transmission were a handful of truckers and a late-night conspiracy theorist running a radio show out of his basement. When the Crux jammed global communications, expecting immediate panic and surrender, they were baffled to find that the only response they received was a grainy, low-resolution video transmission of a man wearing sunglasses and a cowboy hat. "Daduda." Man stared directly into the camera, took a deep breath, and said, "Y'all done messed up." That was when things started to go wrong. Within minutes, human hackers had hijacked the Crux's entire communications network, replacing their grandiose invasion speech with a looping advertisement for tactical underwear. Then came the memes. A flood of images and videos, incomprehensible to the Crux, but deeply concerning in their sheer volume. One particularly haunting video involved an old Earth comedian shouting, "Here's your sign," while explosions played in the background. The Crux, expecting widespread fear and immediate surrender, instead found themselves watching what appeared to be a nationwide betting pool on how long the invasion would last. And then, the real response began. The United States military, after decades of budget cuts and an ever-present need for creative improvisation, did not see the invasion as a crisis. No, they saw it as an opportunity. At the Pentagon, General Jack Boomstick Thompson slammed his fists on the table and declared, "Finally, a reason to use the Super Murica cannon." "We don't have a Super Murica cannon," one of his subordinates pointed out. Thompson stared at him. "Not yet." Meanwhile, NASA, an organization primarily dedicated to peaceful exploration, reacted in their own unique way. Chief Engineer Dr. Emily Carter immediately began running calculations for a new propulsion system based on theoretical physics she had scribbled on a napkin last week. When someone asked if it was safe, she simply replied, "It'll be hilarious." The Air Force, having spent decades trying to justify their budget for experimental weather control drones, gleefully deployed them into the atmosphere. They weren't entirely sure if the drones would be effective in space combat, but they did know one thing. Lightning was always cool. And the Navy? The Navy had no logical reason to be involved in a space conflict. But somehow, by the end of the first day, they had already managed to torpedo 3 Crux warships. No one could quite figure out how. Back on the Crux flagship, fleet, Admiral Kurz stared at the reports flooding in from the front lines. "The humans," he muttered, his mandibles twitching in confusion. They are not fighting back properly." High Overlord Zarkvul, who had anticipated a swift and decisive victory, frowned. "What do you mean?" Krez hesitated. He was not a warrior who spooked easily, but there was something deeply unsettling about what he was witnessing. "Well," he began, shifting uneasily, "they do not seem to be taking us seriously." Zarkvul scoffed. "Ridiculous. Their species is primitive." Krz swallowed hard. "Sir, they have launched an airborne assault." Zarkvul brightened. "Ah, excellent. Their aircraft must be attempting a desperate counterattack." Krz shook his head. "No, sir. They have launched what they call the Space Florida Man Initiative." There was a long silence. "What?" Zarkvul said flatly. Krz turned the monitor toward him. It displayed a video feed of what appeared to be a single human astronaut in a stolen Crux shuttle, grinning wildly as he jettisoned himself toward the Crux mothership. The transmission crackled, and the human spoke. "Hey, fellas, y'all ever heard of a thing called boarding action?" The screen went black. Krz and Zarkvul stared at each other in horror as alarms blared throughout the flagship. For the first time in Crux history, the invaders realized they had made a terrible mistake. Humanity wasn't an enemy to conquer. They were a force of nature, and the storm had just begun. The Crux Dominion had conquered over 50 planets. They had crushed militaries, assimilated entire civilizations, and turned once proud empires into footnotes in their history of galactic dominance. Their fleet was vast, their soldiers well-trained, their technology generations ahead of most known species. None of that mattered now, because the humans were having fun. The first wave of the invasion should have been simple. The Crux had deployed a blockade, cut off Earth's communications, and landed strike teams in major cities to establish dominance. In every previous campaign, this strategy had led to immediate surrender. Instead, humanity responded by treating it like a nationwide block party. In New York, Crux troops stormed into Times Square, expecting terrified civilians to flee. Instead, they were greeted by street vendors hawking "I Survived the Invasion" t-shirts and hot dog carts offering alien meat special. A Crux commander attempted to issue a surrender demand, but was interrupted by a man in a Statue of Liberty, costume shoving a microphone in his face and shouting, "You just got pranked." In Texas, a Crux patrol cautiously approached a group of heavily armed civilians. Before they could even issue a warning, they found themselves in the middle of a spontaneous barbecue. "Y'all ever had brisket?" one human asked, handing a confused Crux soldier a plate. The soldier, uncertain of protocol, took a bite. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. By the time reinforcements arrived, half the squad had removed their helmets, put on cowboy hats, and were debating whether or not to secede from the Dominion and open a steakhouse. Meanwhile, the Crux mothership was under siege. Not by a fleet, not by a coordinated military strike, by one man, a single human astronaut, later identified as Leroy Jenkins, a former Special Forces operative and full-time chaos enthusiast, had hijacked a Crux shuttle and crash-landed straight into their command deck. The security footage was played over and over again in Crux tactical briefings for years to come. It showed Jenkins, clad in a spacesuit, emerging from the wreckage, adjusting his sunglasses, and pointing finger guns at the nearest guards. "Sup," he had said. What followed was 30 minutes of pure devastation. Jenkins, armed with nothing but a fire extinguisher and an unreasonable amount of enthusiasm, tore through the command center. He hijacked the ship's intercom to blast "Fortunate Son" at full volume. He rewired the automatic doors to slam shut at random intervals, trapping officers in increasingly awkward positions. He accessed the Crux's security system and replaced their standard lockdown protocol with a pop-up message that simply read, "You can't catch me, nerds." By the time the Crux guards finally regrouped to contain him, it was too late. Jenkins had activated the ship's self-destruct countdown. It was unclear how he even found the self-destruct system, as Crux warships were explicitly designed not to have one. On the ground, the situation was somehow even worse. The United States military had been waiting for this moment their entire existence. For years, funding had been diverted from traditional warfare in favor of experimental, often questionable projects. Military R&D departments, once limited by annoying things like ethics and common sense, were suddenly given full clearance. And oh, how they thrived. The Air Force deployed a fleet of modified drones armed with sonic disruptors. The initial goal had been to create a non-lethal suppression tool. Unfortunately, the first test run revealed that the disruptors primarily affected Crux soldiers' highly sensitive hearing. What should have been a painful but manageable assault turned into pure psychological horror when the Air Force programmed the drones to broadcast the sound of a toddler screaming for 8 hours straight. Within minutes, entire Crux squads had dropped their weapons and surrendered. Some curled into the fetal position, sobbing. Others attempted to flee, but the drones followed them. In the Pentagon, General Thompson nearly cried with joy. "This is the proudest moment of my life," he whispered, wiping away a single tear. The Navy, refusing to be outdone, had somehow managed to launch a full-scale torpedo strike from the middle of Kansas. When pressed for answers, the Navy refused to disclose how they had done it, only stating, "We have our ways." Meanwhile, NASA, an organization that, until this moment, had been dedicated entirely to peaceful scientific pursuits, had fully snapped. Dr. Emily Carter, the agency's chief engineer, had spent years developing theoretical warp drive technology that the government had repeatedly denied funding for on the basis that it was dangerously unstable and might fold the planet into itself. With Earth under attack, however, oversight had become relaxed. And so, within hours, NASA launched Project Yeet Drive. Their goal? To attach an experimental warp engine to a standard Earth shuttle and launch it at high velocity toward the Crux fleet. The shuttle, piloted by a volunteer from Florida who had been recruited entirely based on the fact that he had zero self-preservation instincts, took off with a battle cry that would be remembered forever. "Y'all ever been hit by a spaceship doing Mach 20? The Crux flagship attempted to retreat. It was too late. The shuttle, moving at speeds no sane person should ever attempt, slammed into the warship with the force of an extinction-level event. The impact was so violent that the shockwave knocked out power in 3 neighboring Crux vessels. NASA's response was to immediately start drafting plans for a bigger one. Back on the Crux homeworld, High Overlord Zark Vul sat in stunned silence as reports flooded in. His fleet was in disarray. His soldiers were defecting. His command ship had been taken down by one human with a stolen shuttle and a death wish. His forces had prepared for war. But they hadn't prepared for this. A deep existential dread settled over him. "These creatures," he whispered, "are not warriors." He looked up at the latest transmission. It was a short message, hijacked onto every Crux communication channel. It read, "Round 1 was fun. Y'all ready for round 2? Attached was a video of a human soldier wearing aviator sunglasses, sipping from a mug labeled World's Best Invader Slayer, as an explosion went off behind him. Zark Vul slowly, carefully, reached for the emergency retreat protocol. The invasion had lasted less than 48 hours, and it was already over. The Crux invasion was supposed to be a swift, calculated campaign, a show of overwhelming force that would bring humanity to its knees in mere hours. Instead, their fleet had been turned into an interstellar dumpster fire. Their soldiers were either captured, defecting, or too psychologically scarred to continue, and their command ship had been taken down by a single man who hadn't even bothered to bring a proper weapon. And the worst part? Humanity wasn't just winning, they were having a blast. Across the globe, the war effort had turned into a chaotic free-for-all as every branch of the military, private sector, and regular civilians tried to one-up each other in sheer audacity. The official military reports coming out of the battlefield read less like strategic briefings and more like drunken bar bets gone horribly right. One heavily classified document, later leaked by an unknown but suspiciously giggling Pentagon official, contained the following highlights. The Air Force had successfully hijacked the Crux fleet's AI-controlled targeting systems and replaced them with Google Maps, permanently rerouting all enemy warships toward the nearest Waffle House, which, as any Southern resident knows, is the last place you want to pick a fight. The Navy had somehow turned an aircraft carrier into a functional space station, parked it in low orbit, and begun launching orbital torpedo strikes using decommissioned Cold War missiles repurposed purely out of spite. The Army Corps of Engineers had completed, tested, and deployed a prototype railgun within 6 hours, then promptly mounted it onto the back of a Ford F-150 because, in the words of one unnamed officer, if it's going to be stupid, it better be American. NASA had officially rebranded itself as an intergalactic warfare research facility and was now actively recruiting civilians under the motto, "Come yeet things at the enemy for science." Despite these completely unhinged developments, humanity was somehow winning. The Crux fleet was in total disarray. Their command structure had collapsed, and their morale was in freefall. For the first time in their empire's long history, they had encountered an opponent that refused to play by the rules. They had expected organized resistance. What they got was Florida man strapped to a jetpack, armed with nothing but a flamethrower made from a converted leaf blower and pure enthusiasm. And at the heart of it all, the United States military was living its best life. General Jack Boomstick Thompson stood at the Pentagon war table, a manic grin spreading across his weathered face as he looked over the latest battle reports. "All right, people," he boomed, slamming his fist onto the table. "We are, officially, in the just screwing with them phase of warfare. I want maximum creativity. I want unnecessary explosions. I want every single branch of the military competing for the most psychotic kill streak." The room erupted into cheers. Colonel Sarah Firewall Dawson from Cyber Warfare leaned forward, adjusting her aviators. "Sir, I've got teams working on a way to hijack their biometric security systems. We think we can reprogram their flagships' ID scanners to recognize every human as supreme overlord of the Crux Dominion." Thompson nodded approvingly. "Damn fine work, Dawson." Commander Bill Sea Monster Reynolds from the Navy smirked. "We just sank 3 more enemy ships." Thompson frowned. "Aren't you guys on Earth?" Reynolds shrugged. "Yeah. How the hell are you sinking ships that are in space?" The Navy commander grinned. "We don't ask questions, we just get results." Across the room, a younger officer stood up, clearing his throat. "Sir, I have to report a developing situation." Thompson turned, raising an eyebrow. "Spit it out, son." The officer hesitated. "It appears that, well, the National Guard has weaponized memes." The room fell silent. "Explain," Thompson said. The officer gulped. "Sir, the National Guard's social media division has been working overtime. They have successfully infiltrated Crux communication networks and saturated their data streams with viral content." Dawson's eyes widened. "Wait, are you telling me—" "Yes, ma'am." The officer nodded grimly. "They're drowning in memes." The room erupted into chaos. "How effective is it?" someone shouted. The officer clicked a button on his tablet, pulling up a live feed from an intercepted Crux transmission. The alien commander on screen looked shaken. His eyes were bloodshot. His mandibles twitched. Behind him, the walls of his command center were covered in crude digital artwork of Shrek. "They won't stop." The Crux commander's voice trembled. "Every time we try to issue a battle command, we receive another. Another!" He choked, gesturing to the screen behind him. The camera feed switched to reveal a massive, holographic projection of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson giving a thumbs up. The Crux commander screamed. "What does it mean?" he howled. "Why does he stare at me?" The feed cut out. The Pentagon fell into stunned silence. Then Thompson threw his head back and roared with laughter. "By God, I love this country!" On the Crux flagship, Admiral Kruz had officially lost his mind. The war had gone from a conquest to an existential nightmare. He could no longer issue commands without being interrupted by human propaganda. Every screen in his war room was filled with bizarre, nonsensical messages. "Hey, what's your Wi-Fi password?" "You up? Earth has 14 secret moon bases. Want to know where? Aliens can't beat Florida, man. You should have researched first. You ever heard of the back rooms? You're in it now." He slammed his fists onto the control panel. "We have to retreat!" "But sir," a desperate officer stammered. "High Overlord Zark Vul forbade retreat." Krez's mandibles twitched violently. "Does he look like he's in charge anymore?" The bridge crew hesitated. Slowly, they turned toward the High Overlord's command chamber. The door had been barricaded from the inside. A small, hastily scribbled note had been shoved under the door. It read, "They're insane. You're in charge now. I'm going into hiding." Chris exhaled shakily. "We're leaving," he announced. The officers saluted immediately. Within seconds, the flagship's engines roared to life as it abandoned the entire invasion force. Across the fleet, the Crux received one final transmission from their command. "Retreat. Do not look back. Do not engage. Do not anger them further." Within minutes, every Crux warship in Earth's orbit vanished into hyperspace, fleeing as fast as their damaged engines would carry them. They had learned a painful lesson. Earth wasn't a battlefield. It was a death trap, and they had walked straight into it. The Crux fleet's retreat was swift and chaotic, ships jumping to hyperspace with no regard for formation, strategy, or even basic safety protocols. Some vessels collided mid-flight, their panic-driven crews scrambling to escape the planet that had turned their proud military campaign into a cosmic joke. Humanity had done something no other species had ever accomplished. They had beaten a technologically superior enemy, not with superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but with sheer, unrelenting nonsense. And they weren't finished. The moment the last Crux ship blinked out of Earth's orbit, General Jack Boomstick Thompson stood in the Pentagon war room, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split in half. "Well, folks," he declared, placing his hands on the war table, "that was the single greatest display of military-grade jackassery I have ever witnessed." A cheer erupted from the assembled officers. Colonel Sarah Firewall Dawson from Cyber Warfare raised a glass of whiskey. "Sir, permission to immediately begin tracking their entire communications network so we can keep haunting them forever?" Thompson pointed at her like a proud father. "Dawson, that's the kind of initiative that gets you promoted." "Commander Bill Sea Monster." Reynolds leaned back in his chair, feet up on the table. "So, we're not just letting them go, right?" Thompson shook his head. "Hell no." The room fell silent. Then, as one, every branch of the U.S. military realized exactly what this meant. The Crux might have thought they had escaped. But humanity was just getting started. Deep in an undisclosed government facility, NASA's top engineers were already at work, a frenzy of motion and caffeine-fueled insanity. Dr. Emily Carter stood at the center of the madness, barking orders like a battlefield commander. "I want a long-range interstellar drive. I don't care if we have to steal half the parts from the ISS, we are following them." An assistant hesitated. Ma'am, Do we really want to chase after an alien empire? Carter turned so fast the poor assistant flinched. Are you kidding? We've spent decades designing cool space weapons with no one to use them on. We finally have a target, and you're asking if we should stop? The assistant gulped. I'll get the parts. Meanwhile, in an undisclosed Air Force hangar, Project Hold My Beer was being activated. No one was entirely sure what Project Hold My Beer was. The only information available was a single, terrifying note scribbled in red marker on the side of a classified file. If this plan is used, just remember, we started it, but the consequences are on them. Whatever it was ready. Across the Crux Dominion, news of the disastrous invasion spread like wildfire. The Crux people, once proud conquerors, now spoke of Earth in hushed, fearful whispers. They took down an entire invasion fleet. They didn't just win, they enjoyed it. They turned our warriors into jokes. High Overlord Zark Vul is still in hiding. The Crux Senate convened in an emergency meeting, their normally cold, calculating political chamber now a frantic, anxiety-ridden mess. Fleet Admiral Kruz stood before them, visibly shaking, his mandibles clicking erratically. "Honorable Senators," he said, his voice raw, "we have to prepare for retaliation." The room erupted into panic. One senator, pale and horrified, whispered, "You don't think they'll come after us, do you?" Kruz opened his mouth to reassure them. To tell them no, humanity had won. They would be satisfied with that. Then, the chamber's security alarms blared. A holographic transmission forced itself onto every screen in the room. The senators froze. The image before them was horrifying. It was a cat, a fluffy orange tabby, blinking lazily at the camera. Then a message appeared on screen. "Surrender your entire empire, or we start Phase 2. There was a long, painful silence. "What the hell is Phase 2? A senator whispered. A second message appeared. "Do you really want to find out?" The Crux Senate surrendered immediately. Back on Earth, Thompson received the official unconditional surrender from the Crux Dominion via email. No formal emissaries. No long-winded peace talks. Just a single desperate message that read, "Please, no more. We will give you anything you want." Thompson smirked, tossing his cigar into an ashtray. "God, I love democracy." Reynolds clapped him on the back. "So, we won." Dawson grinned. "That means we get war reparations, right?" The room went quiet. Then, very slowly, every officer in the Pentagon turned to look at the Department of Economics, whose representatives were completely unprepared to handle a situation like this. One of them coughed. "I guess we could ask for money?" The room exploded with laughter. "Money?" Thompson wheezed. "Buddy, we just traumatized an entire alien empire using memes and experimental weapons we weren't even supposed to have. We don't want their money." Dawson cracked her knuckles. "We want their technology." Reynolds grinned. "We want space travel." And Carter, standing at the back of the room with pure madness in her eyes, whispered the words that would change human history forever. "We want their fastest ship." 1 month later, the Crux Dominion was officially annexed by Earth, not as a conquered territory, not as a vassal state, but as an economic subsidiary. Through one-sided negotiations, read, the Crux were too scared to argue, Earth gained unlimited access to their technology, allowing humanity to become an interstellar civilization overnight. And what was the first thing they did with this newfound power? They built the USS Florida, a massive, absurdly overpowered, bald eagle-painted warship equipped with railguns the size of skyscrapers, a hyperdrive that ran purely on spite, fully automated barbecue station, an AI named Y'allbot programmed exclusively to trash-talk enemies in a southern accent, and a horn that blasted "Born to be Wild" in deep space as humanity took to the stars. One message echoed across the galaxy. The invasion was fun. Now it's our turn. And every other alien empire watching from a safe distance, collectively whispered, "Oh no."